Jewish crowd stop talking before I ask you to be quiet. Keep talking. We're not quite ready. So, Chag Sameach, everyone, a happy and a Hanukkah filled with light. We're so glad that you could be here this evening. And those that are watching us on our webcam, hundreds from across the country, will join us tonight, and it'll be archived and rebroadcast to your heart's content. So we're glad that you could be here. I know in our family we had to kind of peel ourselves away from our kids, and I'm sure some of you did that with your children or grandchildren, and some brought them. But we're glad that you could spend Hanukkah with us. I'm Rabbi Dan Moskowitz. I'm the senior rabbi at Temple Shalom, and along with my colleague, Rabbi Carrie Brown, and our Rabbi Emeritus, Philip Bregman, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our congregation. We are so honored to partner with CIJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, in this wonderful program, and we welcome the leader of the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau, with us this evening. Tonight is the first in a three-part dialogue with the leaders or leadership of each of the three parties, major parties in Canada, and we will be able to confirm dates in the new year for representatives from the Conservative Party and from the NDP, and those will take place here at Temple Shalom as well in partnership with CIJA. And so at this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Jason Murray, the CIJA Pacific Region Board Chair, to share with us some words of welcome. Jason.
Thank you, Rabbi, ladies and gentlemen, rabbis, Mr. Trudeau. Welcome. Chag Hanukkah Sameach. On behalf of the Pacific region of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, or CIJA as we're often known, and on behalf of Greater Vancouver's Jewish community, welcome. CIJA is the central national advocacy organization in Canada working to represent the interests of Jewish Canadians at all levels of government and civil society, as well as working towards strengthening the important Canada-Israel relationship. At CIJA, we work to better inform our elected representatives in Ottawa, in Victoria, and here in Metro Vancouver about social policy issues like poverty and housing that affect the Jewish community and the community at large, about the scourge of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism that strike at the heart of the Jewish people locally, nationally, and around the world, about the centrality of the State of Israel to the Jewish people, and about the safety and security of Jews in Canada, around the world, and in Israel. Importantly, we work to strengthen the Canada-Israel relationship and to reaffirm our two countries' shared values of democracy, of freedom, the rule of law, equality, innovation, education.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Essentially, the issues we advocate on behalf of our community aren't just Jewish issues, they are Canadian issues. They don't apply to one particular region, ethnic group, or cultural group. They speak to our values as Canadians, our aspirations as Canadians. And they're not partisan issues. And that's why it's so very important for us, the Jewish Canadian community, to be fully engaged in Canadian democracy. That's why, regardless of our political affiliation individually, we get to know our elected representatives and those who aspire to be our representatives. And it's why we engage in open discussion and dialogue about issues we deem important. It's forums like this one tonight that we exist. Let me be clear, CIJA is nonpartisan by design. We strive to inform, we strive to educate, and we strive to advocate. And those endeavors have no party lines. In just over 10 months, October 19th, 2015, Canadians across the country are going to go to the polls in a general election. It's only 10 months away. And as Rabbi Moskowitz explained at the outset, tonight's forum is the first of a three-part series that will include similar town halls with leaders of the Conservative Party and the NDP. But tonight, we're honored to be joined by Liberal Party of Canada leader, Mr. Justin Trudeau.
Thank you.
Mr. Trudeau, we are grateful that you set aside time in your calendar to be with us tonight to meet with the Greater Vancouver Jewish community, to share your thoughts and to answer our questions and to take our questions. And I'd like to also take a moment to acknowledge some of the honored guests that are in the room this evening. The member for Vancouver Centre, Dr. Hetty Fry. And Member of Parliament for Vancouver Quadra, Joyce Murray. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau, Dr. Fry, and Ms. Murray, for the Liberal Party's support of Canada, Canada's Jewish community, and your support of Israel. Before we begin the forum this evening, I'm going to turn back to Rabbi Moskowitz, whose synagogue has graciously hosted and co-sponsored this evening's events, to lead us in candlelighting on this, the first night of Hanukkah.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you. This is the first night of Hanukkah, a holiday that celebrates our struggle for religious freedom. And we are particularly aware as Jews of the tremendous freedom and security that we experience here in Canada. And we are forever grateful for that. And I count it as one of the miracles of the Jewish people as well, to be a free people in this land. It's my pleasure to invite up to join us to light the Hanukkah Brian Reback, one of the leaders of our Temple Teens program, along with my colleague, Rabbi Carrie Brown, and Anat Wolf, if you would join us, please. If you would, please, a former member of the Knesset who's here visiting, if you'd join us as well with Jason to light the Hanukkah. Those that heard me on the CBC this morning, I will not be singing this blessing. There was applause, and I noted who that was. Thank you. The oil lasted 8 days, but it took 7 of those just to light the candles.
Please join with us. Chag Sameach. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hanukkah marks, of course, the miracle of a tiny band of Jews that fought for religious freedom and justice against great and overwhelming odds. In a similar vein, though it's not miraculous, it is still very much worthy of note to mention that we, a small group of Jews in a corner of the country, are so honored to have not only Mr. Trudeau, but leaders from all 3 of the major parties of Canada to sit with us in conversation and dialogue. And that, though maybe not a miracle of biblical proportions, is worth noting nonetheless. Before I invite Mr. Trudeau to our bima, I want to publicly thank the leader for joining us this evening and for giving this opportunity. Thank you very much.
You must sit on these stools all the time. I have no idea how to look cool sitting on a stool, so I'm okay. I got special socks for it. So. I also want to thank Temple Shalom member Karen James, who really envisioned this series. Karen couldn't be with us tonight. She's speaking as she does around the country and really across North America. And she's not here tonight, but I know she's watching on our webcam at some point. I do want to explain the format for our conversation tonight. Mr. Trudeau is going to share a few open remarks, and then with the time remaining, I'm going to engage him in a conversation based on the questions that you submitted to us through your registration process. We're not going to be taking questions from the floor this evening. The questions have not been shared with Mr. Trudeau, and we received more than 150 questions. And I've spent the last week or 10 days with the leadership of CEJA sitting and going through all of those questions and culling them together into about 15 or 20 questions, and we'll be lucky if we get to those, that seem to fall into three categories: Canada-Israel relations, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and Jewish values as they pertain to Canada's domestic policy. And for the most part, the questions that I'm going to ask this evening will fall within those categories. The last thing that I want to say is very important. Not that the other things weren't, but I want to remind all of you that Mr. Trudeau is an invited guest here into our synagogue and into our sanctuary, and that we will treat him like a guest in our home, as we will with the leaders of the NDP and the Conservative Party when they come to this forum in a few months' time in the next year. Tonight's a conversation. It's not a debate. So let's treat Mr. Trudeau and all of the speakers that come to us as our guests with respect, with dignity, with menschlichkeit, and with derech eretz. This is consistent, I know, with who we are, who we aspire to be, and what we do in a sacred space such as this. As I mentioned, we'll not be able to take questions from the floor. It would just be too unmanageable in a format such as this. But I do think that we've been able to incorporate most of the questions, certainly not all, but many of those that were submitted. And lastly, so we make the best use of our time with Mr. Trudeau, I'll ask you to refrain from applause during our program, except for at the very end and now, as we welcome Mr. Trudeau to our bima.
Well, Chag Sameach, happy Hanukkah. It's a pleasure for me to be here tonight, and I want to thank you all for taking time out of your evenings to come and sit on this first night of Hanukkah and have this exchange. I told Dan I'd be more than happy to take questions from the audience, but he's fairly certain that he's got a good representation from in the cards there. I want to thank Joyce and Hetty Fry for coming out here tonight as our two lone representatives of the Liberal Party of Canada in British Columbia right now. But I do want to highlight Jody Wilson-Raybould, who is our candidate in Vancouver Granville for the next election, along with some others. Great candidates. This has been a interesting and sometimes difficult past year and a half that I've been through since I was selected leader of the Liberal Party. It's been an awful lot of conversations across the country in rooms none quite so nice as this one, but rooms like this with business leaders, with community leaders, with provincial politicians, with citizens, with municipal politicians, to try and talk about the kind of country that we want to build in Canada. And my focus, and I've always tried to bring this forward in politics, because I do believe that politics should be about service and not just about contest, should be about building and not just about winning. My focus has been very much not just on what it is that I and my party might need to say or do in order to win or do well in the next election, but very much with an angle instead on what is it that a Canadian government should be doing in order to build a stronger future. And if we do get elected, what is it that we need to be focused on? And that lens, I think, goes beyond the short-term electoral drive that quite frankly is so all-encompassing when you're in Ottawa, whether it's question period, whether it's debates over this bill or that bill, I find that the more time I can spend across the country in conversation like this, taking questions, talking about the shared values that define this country, the more I am reminded of why it is that I chose this particular life, choosing to be away from my family. You stepped away from your kids tonight. I've stepped across the country from my kids. And it's a reminder for me that what we do with our service, all of us in different ways, is to focus on being worthy as parents of the kids that we have or the community that we are part of. Because citizenship is more than just paying your taxes and obeying the law and voting from time to time. It's also about understanding that each and every one of us has a capacity and therefore a responsibility to shape the world with our actions and with our presence. And as we talk about shaping the world, obviously the reflections that we'll have tonight on Canada's role in the world, and specifically the support that Canada will always show towards Israel, is something that needs to be reminded of and brought forward. Support for Israel is not and should not be a partisan political issue in Canada. All parties who wish to form government have been supportive of Israel, and we need to make sure that that continues, because supporting Israel is not just about support for Israel, it's also about support for the values that we hold dear and that define Canada. Values of openness, respect, democracy, compassion, a willingness to work hard, a desire to be there for each other, a search for justice, a search for security, a search for stability, a search for opportunity. These are the things that drive us and bind us together. And as a country of extraordinary diversity, it becomes difficult sometimes to define what is a typical Canadian, because there's no language or religion or culture that is uniquely defining who is a Canadian. And instead we realize, as we go through periodic periods of angst about, what is the Canadian identity, that Canadian identity is not based on things so superficial as ethnicity or religion or language. It's actually based on values, shared values that we reflect in all of our communities across this country. I named a few of them: openness, respect, compassion, justice, equality. Many countries around the world aspire to those values, but Canada does a very good job of not just aspiring to them, but defining ourselves through them. And it's easy in a country of diversity to highlight differences, east to west, urban to rural, English to French, new Canadians against people who've been here for generations, against the people who've been here for millennia. But the fact of the matter is, those things that bind us together are shared views or shared values, the commonalities that exist within and across communities are really what has built the incredible success that Canada is, and something that we have to be very mindful to continue to steward, uphold, and cherish. And that's why I'm so touched being able to be here tonight to exchange, to listen to your concerns, to hear comments, and to hopefully all of us leave here a little wiser than we walked through the doors. So I thank you very much for your attention and for your presence here tonight. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you. So you spoke about values, and we sit here tonight on the first night of Hanukkah. I'm clearly a rabbi. You're clearly a politician. They say that the two should never mix, like milk and meat.
Oh, yes, because no rabbi has ever played politics in any way, shape, or form, right?
Not one that wants a renewal on their contract.
Politics can be a tough game, but I'll tell you, temple politics, holy smokes.
You know a lot about our community already. And yet, so here we are, first night of Hanukkah, sitting in a synagogue, on the bima. What role does religion play
in Justin Trudeau's Canada?
Well, let's start with what role does religion play in my life? I was raised by a father who had deep and abiding faith. I was raised going to church every Sunday. We said our prayers as a family. Every evening we read from the Bible every week. And through the first 18 years of my life, it was not just the faith that surrounded me, it was the practice of that faith through very traditional ways. Catholicism in Quebec being what it was. Then I hit 18 and I decided, you know what, the elderly priests at the front of the room weren't speaking to me. And the relationship that I had with God, that was a very strong one, wasn't being deepened, I felt, or helped by the practice of going to church. And so I drifted away and I explored different avenues and discovered different religions, and not in any pursuit way, but just being interested in a wide diversity of truths and beliefs. Until in my late 20s, we suffered the double setbacks of the loss of my younger brother, Michel, while I was living out here in BC, who was skiing in the mountains, doing what he loved. And shortly thereafterwards, my father's loss, the loss of my father. And I actually found solace once again in my faith and in the practice of my faith. And I realized that being a man of deep belief is not always a very popular thing in our modern secular society, but is something that is very, very important and informs the individual that I am in service of community and deep gratitude for all that I've been given in this life, the opportunities, the strengths, and knowing that I have to put that in service of something larger than I. In Canada, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms protects that right to religion, as it does many other rights. And I find that as a politician, there are many situations in which we run into conflicts is probably too strong a word, but an interesting juxtaposition of my role as a politician and my fundamental faith and views. A good example was the debate around women's reproductive rights that came through the Liberal Party over the past year. And I realized that as a politician, my responsibility is to stand up and defend people's rights. And that's the role that we take as representatives. If I'm going to stand to be the representative for 100,000 people who live in the riding of Papineau in Montreal, my responsibility is towards defending and upholding their rights and creating opportunities for them. And that, for me, is something that is part of why Canada is such an extraordinarily great country, that we do understand how important it is to stand up for each other's rights and to defend the fundamental freedoms that keep us free by definition. Thank you, John.
Thank you. So Prime Minister Harper has received really great praise and some criticism for his clear support for Israel. To what extent do you share Mr. Harper's support for Israel, and where do you part company with the Prime Minister?
That's a great question. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the Liberal Party is steadfastly in support of Israel. I actually am quite proud that there is not any light or distance between the policies of the government of Canada under Stephen Harper and the policies of the Liberal Party when it comes to Israel, whether it be around a two-state solution, a Jewish state alongside an Arab state, both with a right to security, stability, that needs to be gotten at by direct negotiations between the two parties. Whether it's in our criticism of unilateral actions by either sides. It is official government policy in this country that settlements are unhelpful and illegal. That's Stephen Harper's position, that's my position. And I think we need to keep moving towards a negotiated two-state solution. And as Canadians, we have a role to play in that. Where I part company from Mr. Harper is that I feel that support for Israel should not be a partisan wedge issue for domestic politics. I think that it is important and good as Israel's ambassador to Canada, and even as Prime Minister Netanyahu pointed out, it's good that there is multi-partisan support from all parties for Israel in Canada's Parliament. And this is something that I think we don't need to make it a polarizing issue. And when we do, it actually weakens the position of Canada as being a steadfast friend to Israel for all the right reasons.
And what about with the NDP and Mulcair? Where do you agree or part company with them?
Mr. Mulcair personally has been very strong in his support of Israel, and I think that's something that perhaps has caused a little bit of difficulty within his political party, but I salute his courage for having done that.
So you mentioned unilateral action, and we know and we're all thinking about, I think, what may come before the United Nations Security Council tomorrow. The Palestinian Authority presenting a draft resolution that would unilaterally declare a Palestinian state and give Israel a 2-year deadline to withdraw from East Jerusalem and from the West Bank. How would a Trudeau government respond to tomorrow's actions and the Palestinian bid at the UN?
Well, I mean, we're also looking forward to seeing what France, if what France chooses to put forward, if they put forward something before the Palestinian resolution. But the bottom line is unilateral actions are not conducive towards peace, and therefore, like the same way we rejected calls for unilateral declaration of Palestinian statehood or acceptance at the UN, we would reject the Palestinian measure as it is described.
So would a Trudeau government put in a call to the United States to have them exercise their veto power in this instance?
I think the United States has not indicated that it would, but it's not indicated that it wouldn't. I think it's looking forward to seeing what France actually says, to see if there is something that they can support that would cut off the Palestinian measure. But Canada certainly needs to have the kind of relationship with the United States that means that we can have discussions about serious issues. And yes, we don't feel that the international community should be accepting, and that includes the United States, accepting unilateral declarations or actions that aren't moving towards the peace that needs to be negotiated at.
Okay, thank you. So, if, as most of us believe, that the current negotiations between the P5 and Iran will fail to yield a cessation in Iran's nuclear program, should Canada increase the sanctions on Iran, or is what Canada's doing now or what's currently in play, is that enough?
Let's be very clear. Iran with nuclear weapons is a threat not just to the region but to global security, and it's absolutely unacceptable that Iran could develop nuclear weapons. I am, and here's a point where I'm in slight disagreement with the current government. I am still hopeful. I'm not as optimistic as I was in the beginning, but I am still hopeful that the P5+1 will, with this extra deadline till June, be able to get a movement towards resolving this. I think it's become very clear that there is a distinction between the people of Iran and the government of Iran. And making sure that we're applying the leverage and the pressures to the right elements in the government and not being counterproductive in that requires us to be diligent about it. My dear friend and often mentor Erwin Kotler has been calling for a long time to put the Iranian Revolutionary Guards on the terrorist list for Canada, and this government hasn't yet. But I mean, that's certainly an action that we'd be pushing for to make sure that it happens, because they have been a very potent force for the kind of vehement antagonism that the Iranian government has been capable of. There are causes for optimism that Rouhani may still turn to be the moderate, even though there are signs that he hasn't been. There are real worries about that, but I think it's a definite step up from Ahmadinejad, and I think the pressure from the Iranian people is starting to be felt amongst the highest level of the Iranian governments, and even on the clerical side. So I think we keep trusting multilateralism, but backing up with a healthy dose of skepticism as well.
So beyond putting the Iranian Revolutionary Guard on the terrorist watch list, what else could Canada do to affect a change and prevent Iran from achieving nuclear capabilities?
Well, I mean, Canada is always limited in our ability to do anything on our own, but I think being a heeded player in multilateral actions is something that we need to. I think we've strayed perhaps a little much into the megaphone diplomacy style, where we stay firmly on a wide range of issues where we stand, and don't worry too much whether people are actually listening to us or not. And I think Canada has a tradition of working well with like-minded allies on actions that actually have the desired outcomes and impacts. And I think that's something we can continue to do.
Okay. I'm going to shift us away from Israel only slightly, though, really, to talk about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So first, what do you see as the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, or are they one and the same?
Anti-Semitism has always been, the distinction against a community or individuals within a community as in its classic form. What we're seeing right now is a new kind of anti-Semitism that is a form of anti-Zionism, that is discrimination against the state of Israel and the right of Israel to exist. And it's characterized in three typical facets: delegitimization, demonization, and a double standard, where either using phrases like Israel Apartheid Week, for example, is a demonization that is simply illegitimate. Obviously, the delegitimization is undercutting Israel's very real rights and legitimacy amongst the community of nations. And the double standard is, of course, when countries like Sudan or others talk about human rights violations in Israel, which is Anyway, we all know the absurdity of that particular phrasing, and we have to be very, very aware that this new anti-Semitism, which is very much anti-Zionism, is prevalent. And I'm proud that the strong stand that Canada continues to take at the United Nations was actually started by a Liberal Prime Minister, Paul Martin, who made that shift away from abstaining and actually took stronger positions at the UN against these unfounded and irresponsible attacks by a community of nations against Israel.
And would a Trudeau government continue the example begun by Prime Minister Martin?
Yes.
So part of the places, and thank you for your distinction, or the lack, I mean, there isn't really a distinction in our eyes between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
It's a continuum.
It is, and one that has gone throughout history and swings back and forth with us always in the crosshairs. But it plays out particularly on college campuses, on university campuses, in the BDS movement. We know at Concordia and at York and many universities across the United States that the student governments and in some cases even the administrations have gotten involved in this boycott, divest, and sanction. And I know firsthand Jewish students. My colleague Rabbi Philip Bregman, who's here, the president of Hillel BC, deals with students all the time that feel threatened. Not all of them, but many that feel threatened to live an openly Jewish life on a university campus. I know that there are limits to federal power and what you can do, but how would you respond to that? What can Canada, what can your government, what would your government do about that?
It's not even an issue of anti-Semitism or an Israel issue or a Jewish issue. It's a Canadian issue. We cannot imagine that any student in this country should feel afraid going to school, feel ashamed or worried about their identity, religious or otherwise, in a place of higher learning in Canada, or in any place in Canada for that matter. And the BDS movement or Israel Apartheid Week are absolutely unacceptable expressions of that fly in the face of Canadian values and Canadian openness and respect. I don't use the word tolerance because I don't like the word tolerance. I think there are places in the world where a little bit of tolerance would go a long way, and they should probably aspire to it, but I don't think Canada is anymore one of those places. To tolerate someone is to accept that they have the right to exist as long as they don't come and bother you too much. I'll tolerate that you have, your place. In Canada, we should be moving towards acceptance, respect, friendship. There isn't a religion in the world that says, tolerate thy neighbor. We go a step further than that, and that I think is really important. And I think we need to call the BDS movement and Israel Apartheid Week for what it is: unacceptable discrimination.
So, you go to Quebec, an important province in your electorate. We know that Quebec has a rising Muslim population, and along with that, rising incidence of anti-Semitism. I would imagine that just like here, you'll be invited to speak to the Muslim community, and in a forum, hopefully such as this, and they'll ask you, Mr. Trudeau, you spoke for CIJA and Temple Shalom, and you spoke in support of Israel. How will you explain that support of Israel when they ask you, why do you support Israel? How will you answer them?
It's not a hypothetical question. It's something that I actually deal with regularly. I attend as many mosques as I attend temples, as I do gurdwaras, as I go everywhere else. I think it's really important to demonstrate and from time to time I've had people point out, what are you doing, going to this particular mosque to speak to 500 Muslims. I'll point out, first of all, those are 500 Canadians that I'm speaking to. And as a Canadian politician, it's really important that we do. But one of the things that I have taken great solace in as a principle is that I will say the same things in any synagogue as I will in any mosque, which means inevitably I end up, in many cases, leaving people in both places fairly dissatisfied with my answers. But how Canadian is that? The fact is I talk about exactly as I had, the need for a peaceful, secure Palestinian state alongside a peaceful, secure Jewish state. And the fact that until there is a level of respect towards the fact that this is the way the world is unfolding, we're going to continue to have to disagree on this when I'm speaking to people who disagree with me on that. I talk about how important it is that we understand the values that define us as a country. Respect, openness, inclusion, and how that path and the role that Canada has in pushing people along that path in the world is extremely important. So I continue to, when I spoke at a large Islamic conference a few years ago, there was about 20,000 young Muslims from all across Canada come to this in the fall of 2012, actually December 2012. I told a story about one of the leaders, one of their leaders from history, who had been was a young man of strong religious convictions, who was challenged by elders in his community to stand strongly for that community and not look for compromise and accommodation and respect with the other side of the debate. And how that young man realized that it's easy to be polarized and anchor yourself in one identity and push back and refuse the other identity, and fight against it in a leadership position. Much harder to take a path of compromise, of openness, of respect, of finding middle ground, of finding common ground. And I looked out at the sea of 20,000 young Muslims who were also 20,000 young Canadians, and I told them that leader from their history wasn't a caliph or an imam, but he was a prime minister, Wilfrid Laurier, who was my second favorite prime minister, who was under terrific pressures in Quebec in the years before the turn of the century, where being a liberal was seen as a very bad thing for a Quebecer. People kept saying l'enfer est rouge, hell is red. Don't quote me on that. I'm just looking straight at the camera on that one. But there is a tradition there, and Laurier said, no, we live together in this extraordinary city of Montreal. We live together in this extraordinary country. There is a path of respect and mutual success, and it's a harder path, but it's one that ultimately we need to walk. And I think that message that Canada does well is one that we need to be sure that we are continuing to push, not just here in Canada, but around the world. And that's the kind of message that I bring forward to the members of the Muslim community that I speak with.
I look forward to hearing that. I think that
Actually, you can read that RIS speech if you pick up a copy of Common Ground, my autobiography, which would make a great Hanukkah present for loved ones. All the proceeds go to the Canadian Red Cross, and it'll give you both that text and many others. So there you go.
I will add that to my Hanukkah reading list.
There you go.
I think that part of it is that there is, and it's not specific to you, but there is trepidation within the Jewish community that Israel is always the one that's asked to compromise, that Israel is always the one that's asked to give up this or to acquiesce on that, and that there's not similar pressure put upon the other parties in the arena.
That a lot of this comes out of the United Nations, where there's a lot of moral relevancy arguments. You alluded to one as well with the charges against human rights violations brought against Israel. And there's a concern within our community that the slightest crack in that wall of support that we've felt from the Canadian government thus far will be the beginning of a slow or rapid slide into Israel being once again pushed up against a wall. And I'm not sure there's a question in that, but I'll put one in there, which is, so how do you alleviate, if you can, our concerns that we might see that wall of support that we've enjoyed thus far fracture?
Support for Israel is not a political goal or even an ideological goal. It's a reflection of who we are as a country that values democracy, that values human rights, that values peace, stability, security. And Israel is an example of that. No country is perfect. Canada certainly isn't, but is striving for a high standard of that and achieving it in a part of the world that is facing significant challenges around living out those exact values. And for me, if a Canadian wants to be serious about wanting to bring peace and strength and respect to the world, we could do nothing other than be supportive of Israel as a democracy founded on values that very much have their same reflection in Canada. So I guess in another way, your question is, how am I confident that Canadians will not turn our backs on Canadian values? And the answer to that is both vigilance, but also a deep and abiding trust in Canadians.
So we sit here in beautiful British Columbia, a place I know that's dear to you and has become dear to me as well. Canada is a leader in innovative green technologies, and so is Israel. There are many places where Canada and its technological advances and Israel as its startup nation can and should have partnerships. Canada and Israel are currently in the process of strengthening the free trade agreement between the two countries. What would you do to strengthen that free trade agreement between Israel and Canada?
Oh, I think one of the things that Canada struggles with is entrepreneurship and investing in locating startup capital and venture capital and angel investors. There is a lot of lessons that we can learn from Israel's success over the past decades in developing a knowledge economy. I mean, when you think of what Israel has been able to do, and when I was last there, it was I had the opportunity to fly around in a helicopter for a bit, and you really, the scale of Israel as a country, compressed, is absolutely amazing to see. But to look at that success that has been developed there in the significant absence of much in the way of natural resources, certainly compared to what we have in Canada, I think we should take as a real challenge. I mean, the fact is, why is it that Canada, that has natural resources, should feel any less of a drive to innovate, to step up, to be entrepreneurs, to be looking for solutions around technology, particularly because developing our natural resources in this country have required tremendous technological innovations and will continue to require technological innovations and scientific discoveries to make sure that we can develop our natural resources in a way that is environmentally sustainable, that is economically sustainable for future generations, and respectful of the communities that will be affected by that natural resource development, particularly First Nations communities. But these are challenges of governance, these are challenges of innovation, and I think how we reflect on Israel's success, become inspired by Israel's success and also create even greater ties than we already have between Canadian institutions of higher learning and universities in Israel. I think there's a huge opportunity for more exchanges of students, more exchanges of faculty, more drawing in of concrete partnerships that will continue to expand the thriving opportunities between our countries.
That'd be wonderful. That would be wonderful. So shifting now to social policy issues, and particularly as they pertain to Jewish values, we received hundreds of questions for tonight, and with all of those regarding sort of social policy, they seem to come into three categories, not exclusively, but almost entirely. And those were keeping with the themes of immigration, of poverty, and of elder care or senior care. Obviously, the federal government must work in partnership with provincial and local governments to address these issues, but there's still something that can be done on a federal level. So I'd like to spend a moment with you and address each of those three in turn. So with regard to immigration, would a Trudeau government roll back the recent immigration reforms made by the Harper government, which include, among other things, designated country of origin lists and the process to apply for refugee status in Canada?
Yeah, that's a specific question. It goes beyond just immigration. I've got a lot to say on immigration, but specifically around refugees. Canada has learnt over the past decades how important it is and how positive it is for a country to draw in refugees. My father liked to tell the story of how in 1972 he was welcoming in 3,000 East African refugees from Uganda fleeing Idi Amin, particularly the Ismaili Muslims. And he was in the middle of a difficult election campaign. For those of you who remember 1972, and I was only months old at that point, but the land
It's okay, I was only 2.
Yeah. The land is strong was the campaign slogan in that one, and didn't quite work out that well. But my father was challenged on a news broadcast about those. Are you really serious about bringing in these 3,000 African refugees? How can you do this? This is a terrible idea for Canada. And my father said, actually, I'm not going to do that. And the reporter sort of said, oh, well, see, that's great. He goes, no, I've actually changed my mind. I'm going to bring in 5,000 of them. And whether it was the Ismaili community that has succeeded and contributed beyond anyone's wildest imaginings to Canada's economic success, whether it was the Vietnamese boat people refugees, whether it was successive waves of refugees in following years, there has always been a tremendous success in this country by drawing in people and giving them a safe haven. Because a refugee is someone who has no home, no safe place, no state, that all they have in the country where they live is danger of persecution, torture, and death. And the value of drawing in these people and giving them an opportunity, and not just to succeed and provide for their children, but to actually become Canadian, is immeasurable to our society. And that's why the cutting down of refugee health benefits, the way this government has, the imposition of country of origin or preferred nation status on refugees, which renders more vulnerable individuals coming from certain minorities within otherwise democratic countries. Not every democratic country is as respectful of diversity as ours is, and therefore we need to make sure that there is an emphasis on being the welcoming country that we are, and never making mistakes that were made in the past with either the St. Louis or the Komagata Maru. And understanding those mistakes and not repeating them is, I think, something at the heart of what we need to do as a nation that, quite frankly, has room and opportunity to draw in people and give them opportunities, as long as we give them the support to be able to succeed as well. But that is a part of our privilege and responsibility as Canadians. On immigration in general, whether it's cutting down of family reunification, or whether it's the mismanagement of the temporary foreign workers file, which has resulted in large part from the cutting off of the low-skilled immigration stream. This government has, even though it's talked a good game on immigration, actually hasn't continued in the tradition that Canada has always had of drawing in people, the best and the brightest, to contribute and work and build, and not just be units of production as workers, but to be nation builders and contributors to their community and to their country's future.
Thank you. I guess the question about poverty and senior care really could almost be combined.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, no, it really is true. We find that when we look at poverty statistics here in Metro Vancouver, with regard to the Jewish community, the percentage of Jews living under the poverty line increases with age. More Jewish seniors are living below the poverty line than the younger generations. On a federal level, what can we do, what can you do to address poverty in general and in particular for seniors who are living below the poverty line?
When taking the poverty aspect in general, Canada's economy has done quite well over the past 30 years. Our GDP has more than doubled in size, grown over 115%. However, at the same time, since the early 80s till now, median household income has increased by only about 14 or 15%, which means most Canadian families, the middle class, haven't had a raise, not a real one, in a generation. And people are right now feeling that for the first time perhaps in the history of our country, we have a generation of young people who won't have a better quality of life or greater opportunities than the previous generation. And that's a turning around of the very premise, the promise upon which Canada was built. That regardless of where you're born, where you come from, what part of the country you're in, what side of the tracks you're on, if you work hard, you're going to be able to succeed. And that's one of the things that has made Canada so successful. And I think it's something in our psyche where the country that is so big and deals in so many other parts of the country with very difficult winters, you know that you need to lean on each other and be there for strangers. And that sense of community has contributed very much to our success. And the fact that right now that success is under threat, that people are in greater likelihood of falling out of the middle class into poverty than they are of actually growing into the middle class, is extremely destabilizing. And that's something that I have put at the center of the Liberal Party platform. And what we need to do is we need to give both help and growth to the vast majority of Canadians who need it. And that's where we get into specific policies. But writ large, we believe in investing in education because education is an extremely powerful tool to bettering one's success and outcomes. Access to high quality education for everyone is something that we need to put forward. But also infrastructure. Looking at the serious need around housing, and that obviously touches on seniors, but on a number of vulnerable populations where we need a federal government that once again re-engages with the housing file. I mean, ridiculousness of the housing market here in Vancouver right now, but it's driving people into situations of insecurity that is quite frankly terrifying. And particularly when you get to our seniors who've lived and worked hard all their lives and are facing retiring either with little or no pensions or even retiring into debt, which is unfortunately the reality for a number of people. This is not the social contract that we should be living in Canada. We need to make changes to our healthcare system to make sure that there is a move towards quality home care and community care, and not just institutional care. We need to be innovative in how we empower our citizens to stay healthier longer. We need to do something around pensions, making sure that people will be able to retire on a decent pension as they age. We've committed to restoring the age of retirement from the 67 that Mr. Harper has moved it to back to 65, because even though people are living longer, there is a false crisis that Mr. Harper created around the fact that 67 was justified in terms of pushing things off. What it really does is downloads onto the province for 2 more years the care of our most vulnerable seniors living closest and below the poverty line. So there's a number of things that we need to do around this, but the lens through which I look at it is a fairly classic one, which is a society will be judged by how we care for our most vulnerable, and how we respect our elders, how we include them, how we recognize the realities of a sandwich generation, which is dealing with young people who are returning to live in their parents' basement after having gone through university. They return home instead of moving on into their jobs and their lives. And elders who are requiring more and more care, who are often being cared for by the same family who's worried about the 20-somethings not leaving their home. Realizing that Canadians need help and support is something that our governments need to do.
I'm glad that you mentioned housing as well, and that bounce back, that boomerang child that comes back to live in the parents' basement. And for many of us in Vancouver, the basement's not available because it's a mortgage helper, and there's somebody already living there. It's not available to the 20-year-old that comes back or to the senior that can't find quality senior care. And I know that housing here, particularly in Vancouver, I mean, it's a provincial issue, it's a local issue. But could you be more specific about what you would do on a national level, a federal level, to address that?
Yes, it's a provincial and municipal issue, but municipal governments are delivering 60% of services to Canadians on about 8% of the tax base. They're tapped out. The crumbling roads and bridges, the wastewater treatment plants that need upgrades. There's only so much a municipality can raise property taxes, which is the only lever that they have. Provinces are dealing with rising healthcare costs, increasing challenges around education, simply don't have the capital capacity to invest in much in the way of housing, although they are trying to do what they can. So if municipalities and provinces are tapped out, if families are living on average under a $28,000 non-mortgage household debt level, which is average household, non-mortgage household debt in this country, who does have the capacity to invest? Well, the federal government does. Because of smart decisions made in the 90s, by whichever government was in power in the 90s, we managed to slay the deficit and bring our debt to GDP ratio down from the 70% that was pushing us to the brink of collapse, down to a very manageable, 30 or so percent. We're the envy of the world on that. And you look at that capacity to invest, combined with a set of interest rates, long-term interest rates that are as low as they could possibly be, as well as a need to create and to encourage the high-skilled jobs that come from investing in infrastructure and building infrastructure. We have an opportunity right now to make that decision, have the federal government step up and understand that investing in housing, stepping in to continue the co-op agreements that are all starting to come to term, understanding that investing in seniors housing, investing in multi-use housing, and giving that infrastructure investments to help partner with municipalities and provinces to respond to needs is a really important thing. When you think about infrastructure in general, the roads and highways we drove here tonight on, this is Vancouver, so there were no highways, but the roads we came here on, the bridges we take, the airports we use, these were all infrastructure wasn't built and paid for by our taxes. They were built and paid for, in most cases, by our parents' taxes and by our grandparents' taxes. And every generation has invested in things that are going to lead to stability and prosperity for future generations. That's been the story of the success of this country. And the fact that right now, when there is a historic opportunity to start investing for the long-term prosperity of our country, for the stability of housing, for better public transit, for community infrastructure, for wastewater treatment that is needed, our government is instead choosing not to step up in infrastructure, saying, well, we'll return you a few of your tax dollars right now and we'll let the future take care of itself, I think is a fundamental mistake. And that's an argument I'm looking forward to having over the coming year with this current Prime Minister about how he's not planning and building for the future of our country in the way we need to, and he's not caring for our seniors on housing or our veterans on mental health, and how I feel his priorities are in the wrong place.
Thank you. I know that we're just about out of time. I had one last question. You're in a unique position in that your father was Prime Minister of our country. You got to watch him as you grew up lead. Judaism honors, as you mentioned, we honor our elders. We revere education, learning from the example and the role model of those that came before us. Briefly, because your guy gave me the sign, what did you learn from your dad that would guide you as the leader of this country?
First of all, when you think about our first experience as citizens perceiving politics, it's often our parents grumbling. I think my friends had this experience, parents grumbling at the TV, talking about broken promises, irrealistic plans, corruption, breakdown. I mean, a lot of us grew up with a negative perception of politics. I didn't. I grew up until I was 13 with my father as Prime Minister, but then for the years following, watching people walk up to my father and say thank you. Thank you for his service. Thank you for the vision of the country that he put forward. Thank you for the impact that he'd had on our country. And I understood that politics can and really should be a force for good, for positive outcomes in our society. And that may be seen as sort of a quaint view by some. But politics is no more, no less than how we choose to organize ourselves as a community, as a society, as a country. And we should be able to feel that politics is about getting things done right, in the right way, about investing for the future, about responding to the needs of the present, about honoring the people who deserve recognition, about caring for the vulnerable. Politics should be a reflection of what we are as a society, and I saw that it was possible to have it be about that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so proud of the incredible team that we're building within the Liberal Party, because it's not just about showcasing a Liberal Party that would have a phenomenal front bench to form government. It's also about reminding people that the best and the brightest should be getting into politics, should be stepping forward, for all parties. And this dumbing down of politics is really frustrating to me because it flies in the face of what I know it can and must be in its ideal. Specifically from my father, I learned two things. One is around leadership style. He was a very smart man who knew that the best way to solve problems, the best way to lead is to gather around you the smartest people you could possibly find and engage with them, watch them disagree with each other, learn from them, and then take the right decision. Consult, partner with others, learn, but also understand that it comes down to your core values, your core priorities. That you can always compromise on policy, but you must never compromise on principle. And the final thing he told me, ultimately, is to trust Canadians. We talk about trust a lot in politics. And it's often talked about in the way that, we really need for citizens to trust their politicians again, which I agree would be really nice. But if I'm going to leave you with one thought, let it be this one. How nice would it be if we had a government that trusted its citizens? I think that's what we can aspire to, and that's what we deserve. Merci beaucoup d'être ici ce soir.
Thank you. Mr. Trudeau has graciously agreed, time permitting, to pose for some photos. Those that would like a photo with the leader can, not yet, can exit through these doors to the side of the sanctuary. If you don't have time or don't desire a photo with the leader, please exit through the rear doors. Sija and, I feel like I'm a flight attendant.
Or if you just want to chat and
Right.
ask me a question, that's fine.
That's fine too. Sija and Temple Shalom are currently working on confirming the dates for the other two speakers in our series, and we'll have those for you, we hope, in the new year. A thank you again to everyone who made this evening possible. We wish you a Hanukkah Sameach, a joyful Hanukkah, and a thank you again to Mr. Trudeau.